we're now slowly evolving. I mean, slowly, I shouldn't say slowly, but we are evolving to an era where, we are going to enable technology to take action.
Welcome to It's About Data, episode 48. This episode is a continuation of our conversation with Bruno Aziza from episode 47. This time we're talking about systems of action. So Bruno Aziza, welcome again. We're recording another episode. Great to have you last time. You're going to tell us a bit about systems of action to kick off this second part of this two-part series.
Well, thanks for having me a second time. I know I get excited and I talk a long time, so I'm thankful that you guys made more room for me.
There's not enough time, Bruno, in the day for you, so we need to at least do a second episode.
So yeah, I think, there's a lot of excitement today in the industry about context graphs, right? And
Yes.
while I recognize, of course, that this is a trend, I think it's actually a subset of the bigger trend that's happening. And what's happening is we're now slowly evolving. I mean, slowly, I shouldn't say slowly, but we are evolving to an era where, we are going to enable technology to take action, right? So if you look at the history of our industry, systems of records, system of engagement, system of intelligence, we spend a lot of time on system intelligence. It's very important. The next bit is systems of action. So what's a system of action is essentially, think about it as the automation driving outcomes for you. And there's a lot of assumptions in order to make that happen, right? The first assumption, of course, is that these agents need to have autonomy. So that means they need to understand a lot before they actually get to autonomy. Like, they can't just wait for your permission. So you need to have strong governance, strong security, data access. There's a lot of, strong automation, technology that backs up this autonomy. The second one is they actually have to have agency. So that means they have to have alignment with the objective that we're trying to execute on. And then third, which is where really I think the context graph comes in, is they have to have accountability. So you need to be able to then go back and have a certain level of decision intelligence, understand why was this decision made? How do I audit it? When it's a good decision that led to the right outcome, how do we replicate that? When there was a mistake that happened, do we have the operational transparency in order to go back and then correct things? And so for us to get there, there's a lot of, if you want, layers of both technology and approaches that probably need to change. But I think we're entering that decade where we'll all be sitting here in 5 and 10 years looking at how people have designed the best system of action.
Yeah, we just had Sudhir Hasby on the show.
Oh,
so you
yes.
guys are going to be fighting it out for who goes on there first. And you'll have to settle this out over a beer, I guess, something like that. But he was talking very much about context graphs. Yeah. And the other thing also, it also touches a sore point that I know that my colleague Sanjeev is going to be bringing up, because he and I are going to be appearing later today on theCUBE. We're going to be recording that session of the data game, basically giving our 2026 predictions. And what Sanjeev is that, his point is that there's going to be, there's been a lot of misunderstanding about what context is. Yeah. And the fact is that on one hand, we've had semantics. I mean, Bruno, you mentioned business objects. They originated Universe, was it like 30 years ago? So semantics tiers are nothing new. They've waxed and waned over the years in terms of being used. But now we're starting to look at ontologies and context, and now context graph seems to be kind of like a hot term. How do we get to some understanding on how to understand context so that we can basically make it explicit, explicitly instantiate it?
Yes. And this level of understanding, I think, is at the core of the case I'm making, which is we've been talking a lot about intelligence. And while intelligence is extremely important, what goes into my mind is it's too bad when information is just intelligence. I mean, it's great that but ultimately we get rewarded for actually acting on that intelligence. And so what I've noticed, like, I'll give you an example. I think you commented on one of my blogs when I was coming back from a customer trip. And I had asked this customer, I said, how many dashboards do you have? And they said, we have 27,000 dashboards. And I said, wow, that's impressive. I said, what's the usability of those? And they said, well, 18,000 of them are used by less than 8 users. So that shows
Yes.
me, right? You've got a lot of information. You could call it intelligence, but nobody's doing anything about it, really. So
Yeah.
you look now
It's
at something like,
fragmented and a long tail.
and this happens, by the way, every organization. It's not even an enterprise problem. It's like, because the tooling has been available for creating dashboards and BI solutions, everybody's building their own solution. You can do it at Excel, Power BI, Tableau. I mean, it's really available technology now. But now you end up in an organization that has thousands. So like Pepsi, for instance, they went from 27,000 reports to 50 AI powered analytics consoles. That's what they call them. And now, how did they get there? I think they took this approach that I'm trying to kind of coin as the systems of action. They did a few things with it. The first one is they looked at, how does agentic help me create these actions, and how do agents help each other? This is earlier, no, in the earlier session that we did, we talked about the multiple definitions of hybrid. Everybody's going to build their agents in their silo. The next level is the orchestrations of these agents across multiple silos. That's a key component of doing systems of action well. You can't just be stuck in your silo, because the reality of the job to be done is cutting across multiple silos. So multi-agent orchestration across hybrid systems, key capability of the systems of action. The second bit is the cross-integration for the ecosystem. And you talked about the large vendors that are opening their data. A lot of them are going to have to do that, because otherwise they won't be able to answer kind of the need of the customer. Maybe the last bit I'll talk about is the misnomer of doing agentic for agentic's sake. What I'm learning from sitting down with customers is that, in fact, if you look at the journey of an agentic organization, some percentage is probabilistic, some percentage is deterministic, and it's interestingly enough more deterministic than it is agentic at the moment. Like, I'll give you an example of a large bank in the UK I was working with recently. They have used automation for decades. Approving a loan, they know how to do that. So they don't need to build an agentic system to do that. And so they've added an agent at the end of it, and that is now 30% of that journey. But that's not what the industry is telling you. Like, the industry is telling you today, throw away what you got, build a bunch of agents. And I would submit that in order to build the systems of action, you need to think hard about, you already have rules and tools and automation that is working today. Don't destroy that. Just add the agentic era to that, so you can just kind of get the outcome you want.
Yeah, it's funny. Do you know Lakshmanan, perchance? Also used to be at Google, actually. Yeah, so he said something very similar on our show and said, we've had this agentic technology, but it was deterministic in the past. So my question would be, there's, as you said, a lot of hype around the non-deterministic generative models. How do we decide where that boundary is? And how do we train people to do both? I feel like people coming from the traditional software world kind of struggle with the non-determinism, and people coming from the machine learning world kind of struggle with the deterministic software. So how do we find the boundary, and how do we train people to do both?
Yeah, and it's very tempting, because building an agent is actually pretty easy, right? I mean, I have built multiple agents myself. Now, try to get them to talk to each other and orchestrate a full flow. That's a different issue. I'll take the example of a company we worked with in Brazil, Banco Bradesco, 70 million customers. How did they do it? They looked at, what is it that we're trying to accomplish in the end, and how do we get there with what we have? So what they first did is internal use cases by aiming at 100% comprehension of documents and queries. So they achieved that first. Then they got after the next level, which is, okay, now that we've got, and you think about it as internal use cases like HR support or any of those that really, you can test if you want your approach, and you can ramp up and down the dial to figure out, okay, now this can be a little bit more agentic, because the risk is very low. I mean, and then they quickly, as they mature, they evolve to, okay, so now that we have comprehension, the next bit is going to be accuracy. So then they put a goal on accuracy, and then they put in a different use case, let's say now customer service. And now it's an aid to the customer service. So they're kind of playing with what is the technology. And then ultimately, once you pass that gate, I'm making it simple for the sake of the argument here, then you start opening up to external use cases. I think the place where people fail is they might go too fast to agentic, too fast to external, and they now realize it's a house of cards. Data wasn't ready.
Yeah.
People weren't ready, and the outcome is poor, and they have to retract, and they kind of missed a moment. And so that's kind of what we've seen people, orchestrate, if I could say it that way. Is their journey has to go and cut through specific gates.
What deal with the last pillar? And obviously, this is beginning to again, we're just really kind of scooping the surface here of a problem like where we really have to boil the ocean. But there's the data part, and you mentioned that. And the thing is, you need the right models, but you also need the right data. Yeah. So what are you seeing in terms of? I mean, we've talked about data quality since day one, and that will be an ongoing battle. But what about making data AI ready? So talk to me about some of the new challenges beyond basically traditional data quality. What do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, so there's a few examples of organizations that I think I can name that probably give you a good sense. So the first one that comes to mind is Ferrari. Right? So Ferrari, highly diverse environment, and they build this real-time application for fan engagement. And the traditional way to think about it is that put everything into one place. I think the first bit is recognize your data is distributed. It's always going to be distributed. You've got to build an ecosystem that taps into that. So I think that's the first rule here is the world of centralized data warehousing, doesn't matter if it's on-prem or in the cloud, you got to think kind of API first, I guess, in a way, is probably the best way to think about data, data ready. Here, I'm not talking specifically about data. I'm talking about how the data kind of travels. The other aspect of it is you have to build for real time, and real time, not just data movement, but also real time data transformation, right? So there's a lot of work that is happening in the industry where people build systems for that. And then probably the third rule is this idea of structured and unstructured kind of coming together. That is really a huge breakthrough because I think today customers have bought different systems. They have given jobs to different departments for these different types of data, and they have to break through the silos inside the organization so they can treat the issue of data as one. Like I think about Lockheed Martin, for instance, is a company that has deployed this ecosystem to 10,000 engineers, and they have a single approach to the data issue altogether. And so that I think it's critical. They've also deployed in the case of Lockheed Martin because, of course, it's a defense organization, strong governance across all of that. So I think not everybody's ready to do it, but I think these three components at least are key to making your data AI ready.
Interesting. Well, and it's funny, so many of the things we're talking about here, we've actually been talking about for years, but I feel like AI is the impetus to do a lot of this stuff, right? To finally get it right.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, I really, it's interesting. Agents are in a way the killer app for unstructured data. I mean, I know most consumers don't see that, but the reality is people building that system is that, well, a lot of it is carried by unstructured data. So.
Right. We've always had the capability to capture messages, for example, customer service messages, but it's been so hard to search them beyond basic things like Elastic, for example.
Yeah.
The other thing too, though, is, and I think, Bruno, you can relate to this, as I said, coming back from your BI days, is that, basically making sure that the data is in the right context. Well, if you had a data mart or data warehouse, you're going with data where the context was kind of like implicit. It was a finite kind of walled garden. But with AI, where you're basically going into many different types of data, and especially getting to unstructured. The fact of whether this data is the right data is not necessarily guaranteed. And I think that's something we'll have. This sounds like another conversation we'll have to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm always happy to come back.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Bruno. We definitely want to have you come back because the conversation changes so quickly. It's just kind of amazing how quickly things are moving in this field. I mean, I also worked with BigQuery quite a bit when you were at Google because we were Google partners, and it just things are so much faster now than they were 5 years ago.
What's funny is that we over the last 25 years, one thing I would say as a closing comment is that we are now in an era that we're really going to have to choose what we should build. Like up until now, we had a really hard time getting to build what we want to build because, storage, processing, networking, just software wasn't readily available. It actually takes a while. It used to take a while, but now you see companies with 50 employees with 5 million customers and 200 million in ARR because all this technology is available. And so the flip side of that is that we got to be really good at determining what should we in fact build.
So
that's
our next conversation.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And we'll let you know when this episode is out.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruno, for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
And we'll add one more thing. Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. Exactly.
Well, that's and folks, that's actually sort of an implicit, basically plug for your new Substack.
My new blog. Yes, it's lessons of what I've learned in this industry over the last 25 years. So I'm trying to share.
Nice. Good. We'll drop a link to it in the show notes. So
thank you guys. Have a great one. Bye bye.
You too.